the lake was my sanctuary. Mornings would roll in with a mist that clung low over the water, curling like smoke between the reeds. I'd sit on the old wooden dock with my fishing rod in hand, the stillness broken only by the rhythmic lap of water against the pilings. Out here, I wasn't just away from the world, I was free of it. But freedom, I've learned, has a way of making enemies. The neighbors, the HOA board, they never understood. To them, the lake was just a backdrop for property values, something to admire from a kitchen window while sipping overpriced wine. To me, it was life itself, something pure, untamed, and mine in a way no committee or clipboard could regulate. Then, one morning, the fish floated to the surface. Silver bodies bobbing lifeless in the current, their glassy eyes staring up like some grim warning. The stench hit me first, chemical, sharp, unnatural, and by the time I saw the greenish slick spreading from the far cove, I knew. Someone had poisoned the water. And when I found out who, I swore the lake wouldn't be the only thing tainted. The lake had always been my secret cathedral. Long before the HOA tried to turn it into a manicured postcard for their property brochures, it was wild. My father used to bring me here as a boy, teaching me how to cast lines, how to respect the silence, how to listen to the rhythm of water. Even now, decades later, I could still hear his voice when the wind pushed through the pines. Patience, Jack. The lake gives when it wants to. My name's Jack Mercer. 53 years old, semi-retired electrician, widower. I wasn't a man with grand hobbies, no golf clubs, no RV parked in the driveway. Just this lake, my rod, and the hours I carved out between chores. To the HOA, though, I was a problem. A reminder that not everyone bent the knee to their rules. I'd been warned before. First, it was dock not up to community standards. Then, unauthorized boat. Eventually, they tried to ban fishing altogether, claiming it disrupted the aesthetic balance of the neighborhood. I laughed in their faces. Fishing, disruptive? The only thing I disrupted was their illusion of control. But nothing prepared me for that morning. The dawn came cold and fog-heavy, the kind that made every sound sharp as glass. I carried my old tackle box down the slope behind my house, boots crunching through frost. The dock creaked as I stepped onto it, the boards groaning like tired bones. I set my rod, ready to let the stillness wash over me. Then I saw it. First, just one fish, floating belly up near the reeds. Then another. Then dozens more, drifting into the shallows like tiny corpses. Their scales caught the pale sunlight, flashing silver in the mist. The smell hit me next, harsh, chemical, biting my nose and throat. I crouched low, dipped a hand in the water, and pulled it back almost instantly. A faint oily sheen clung to my skin, green and iridescent. Poison. My gut twisted. This wasn't nature. This wasn't the lake failing on its own. Someone had done this. By noon, the shoreline looked like a graveyard. Dead bass, bluegill, catfish all tangled in the reeds or washed against the rocks. Even the turtles had crawled onto land, their movements sluggish, eyes clouded. I sat there for hours, staring at the devastation. Grief gave way to rage, and rage demanded a target. And in this neighborhood, there was only one suspect. The HOA. The first board member I thought of was Martin Hale, the self-appointed king of our community. Sharp suits, manicured beard, and a permanent smirk that said he believed rules were sacred so long as he wrote them. He'd made it clear more than once that he considered my fishing an eyesore and bad example for new buyers. I could practically hear his voice dripping with condescension. Maybe if we ruin the lake, Jack will finally stop. That night, I went to bed with the windows open, listening to the silence outside. No frogs, no crickets, no splash of feeding base. Just emptiness. The lake was dying, and I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't just about the fish. It was about me. 2 days later, the HOA held one of their monthly meetings in the community clubhouse. Normally, I ignored them. Waste of breath. But this time, I showed up. The room smelled of fresh coffee and paper copies, with a half-dozen board members sitting at a long table, their faces pinched with self-importance. Hale was in the center, of course, his blue tie knotted so tight it looked like it might strangle him. When my turn came to speak, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "You poisoned my lake." The room went still. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, homeowners shifting uncomfortably in their folding chairs. Hale leaned forward, lacing his fingers. "Jack," he said, calm as a snake. "You're making serious accusations." "I walked that shoreline myself. I saw the fish. I smelled the chemicals. Don't you sit there and tell me it's coincidence." Hale gave a theatrical sigh, glancing at the other board members as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "The association did hire an algae treatment company recently. Perfectly legal. Perfectly safe. If a few fish were lost, well, that's nature. Safe?" My throat still burned from dipping a hand in that water. "You didn't kill algae," I snapped. "You killed the lake. And you did it because you couldn't stand seeing me fish." That got a reaction: gasps, whispers, the kind of electricity that runs through a crowd when someone finally says the quiet part out loud. But Hale just sat back, smiling thinly. "If you don't like the rules, Jack, you're free to move." Move? My father's ashes were scattered in that water. My wife, before cancer took her, had sat beside me on that dock every Sunday morning, hand in mine. This wasn't property. This was home. I left the meeting before I did something I couldn't take back. But as I walked into the night, one thought gnawed at me: if they could poison the lake once, they'd do it again. And if they thought I'd roll over, they had no idea what kind of man I was. That evening, I started digging. I searched the HOA's public filings, invoices, emails neighbors had forwarded me in frustration. Took me 3 days, but finally, the pieces fit together. Hale had authorized treatment through a company called Clearwave Solutions. Except Clearwave didn't specialize in algae control, they specialized in industrial runoff management. Their chemicals were never meant for recreational lakes. Worse, I found receipts for bulk orders of a compound called triclopyr, a herbicide notorious for contaminating groundwater if overused. And here's the irony. That same lake, the one Hale poisoned to drive me out, wasn't just my fishing hole. It was the water source for the neighborhood's wells. Every glass of tap water, every shower, every garden hose, they all drew from the same underground veins the lake fed. The HOA had poisoned themselves. I sat on my dock that night, the moon glimmering over a waterline gone strangely quiet. For the first time, the rage faded into something colder, sharper. Revenge wasn't about shouting in meetings or waving evidence. Revenge was about letting them feel what they'd done. The lake would see to that. And I would make sure it happened sooner rather than later. The first sign came quietly. 3 days after I uncovered the receipts, I heard the Thompson boy coughing outside. His mother, Ellen, waved at me from across the cul-de-sac, trying to smile through the worry in her eyes. "Seasonal allergies," she said, but I could see it: her son's lips were dry, cracked. His skin had that faint gray pallor you don't get from pollen. By the weekend, half the neighborhood had complaints. Kids with stomach cramps. Parents with rashes. Dogs refusing to drink from their bowls. On the community message board, posts began stacking up. Is anyone else's water tasting metallic? Why does my tap smell like chlorine? Boil alert? Hale, of course, brushed it off. At the next HOA email blast, he wrote, "Residents may notice minor changes in water taste due to routine treatment. Nothing to be concerned about." But concern was already spreading like wildfire. I knew the truth, and every bone in my body screamed to expose him. I could have dropped the invoices, the chemical reports, everything, right there on the community forum. But that would have given them a chance to cover it up, to spin the story before the consequences landed. No. I wanted them to feel it first. Sunday morning, I took my truck and drove into town, to the county records office. I spent 6 hours there, hunched under fluorescent lights, flipping through well maps and water rights files. And there it was in black and white: the HOA's precious Lakeview estates sat on top of a single aquifer fed directly by my lake. Poison the lake, poison yourselves. I sat back in that stiff county chair, laughing under my breath. It wasn't joy, it was the kind of laugh you let out when the universe serves irony colder than you ever could. That night, I heard it. Knocks on doors, raised voices, neighbors arguing in driveways. I pulled a chair onto my porch and just listened. "Water smells like bleach, Tom," one woman shouted. "My little girl's been throwing up since Tuesday," another man growled. "I told you we shouldn't trust Hale and his damn board." The cracks were widening. And like water through stone, all I had to do was let time work. Of course, it didn't take long for them to come to me. On Tuesday evening, just as the sun bled orange over the rooftops, Ellen Thompson marched up my driveway. Her face was pale, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, and she clutched a glass mason jar filled with cloudy, greenish water. "Jack," she said, voice trembling. "This came out of my kitchen sink. Do you know what's going on?" I looked at the jar, then at her, and for a moment, my anger softened. Ellen wasn't part of the HOA board. She was just another homeowner, a single mom trying to raise 2 kids. Innocent, in a way. Still, I told her the truth. They poisoned the lake. Her eyes widened. "The HOA?" I nodded. "Tried to stop me from fishing. Hired some company with no business touching recreational water. Those chemicals seeped down, and now," I gestured at the jar. She covered her mouth. "Oh my God." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Don't drink it. Don't let your kids drink it. Bottled water only." Ellen nodded, tears welling. "What do we do?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I wasn't entirely sure. Part of me wanted to blow this whole thing open. Another part wanted to watch the HOA rot from the inside. But fate has a way of nudging you when you hesitate. That same night, Martin Hale showed up at my door. He didn't knock like a neighbor. He pounded. I opened it slowly, and there he was, suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading his temples. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked rattled. "Jack," he barked. "We need to talk." I leaned on the doorframe. "About the lake you poisoned?" His jaw clenched. "Don't start. People are getting sick. I don't know what the hell you've been telling them, but..." "Don't pin this on me," I cut in. "You're the one who brought poison into this community." His eyes flicked away, just for a second. Enough for me to know he was guilty. "You think this is funny?" he hissed. "You think watching your neighbors panic makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I said evenly. "But watching you choke on your own lies does." We stood there, the air thick with hate. Finally, Hale leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "If this gets out beyond the neighborhood," he said, "property values crash. We all lose everything. That includes you." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "The difference is, Hale, I can live without a picket fence. Can you?" His face reddened, his lips twitching like he wanted to say more. But instead, he turned and stormed down my porch, muttering under his breath. By Wednesday, the HOA's empire began to crack. Residents demanded an emergency meeting. Parents refused to send their kids to school until someone explained the sickness spreading through the neighborhood. Local news vans showed up, circling the subdivision like vultures. The board scrambled to keep control. They sent out statements calling it an isolated algae bloom, seasonal contamination, nothing serious. But I could see it in their eyes, fear. Because the truth was clawing its way up from the dirt, and once it surfaced, no lie would bury it again. That night, I sat on the edge of my dock, the moonlight shimmering over poisoned waters. My father's words drifted back to me, "Patience, Jack. The lake gives when it wants to." He was right. The lake was giving now. Not fish, not peace, but justice. I lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl upward, and made my decision. It was time to stop waiting. Time to push. I pulled out my phone, opened the file I'd been building for days, receipts, county maps, chemical reports, and drafted one final message. Tomorrow, the whole county would know what the HOA had done. And when the sun rose, Martin Hale would learn that some poisons don't stay in the water. They spread. The email went out at dawn. Every homeowner, every local reporter, every county health official, I copied them all. Attached were the invoices, the chemical orders, the county maps proving the lake fed directly into our aquifer. No spin, no half-truths. Just facts. By 9 a.m., the neighborhood was on fire. Not literally, but in the way only fear and betrayal can ignite. Mothers huddled on porches with bottled water stacked around their feet. Fathers shouted into phones, demanding answers. Children clung to their parents, asking why their bellies hurt. And Martin Hale? He vanished. The emergency HOA meeting that night looked more like a trial. The clubhouse was jammed wall to wall, voices rising in anger as the board squirmed behind their long table. I stood near the back, arms crossed, listening. "Why didn't you tell us?" a man roared. "You lied to us, Martin," a woman cried. "You poisoned our kids." The accusations piled on like stones, each heavier than the last. The board tried to protest, to wave papers and cite official treatment guidelines, but no one listened anymore. The crowd was bloodthirsty. Finally, the door slammed open, and there he was. Hale, sweat-stained and pale, stumbled into the room with a stack of folders in his hands. His once pristine tie hung loose around his neck. "Please," he croaked, "please, everyone, just calm down." "Calm?" Ellen Thompson's voice cut through the noise like a blade. She held her mason jar of cloudy water high above her head. "You told us this was safe. My son's been sick for a week." The crowd erupted again, voices shaking the walls. Hale raised his hands desperately. "I didn't know it would spread. I was told it was safe. We were just trying to control the algae." "You mean control me?" I said. Every head turned as I stepped forward. My boots echoed on the wooden floor, slow and deliberate, until I stood just a few feet from Hale. "You wanted me off that dock," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut the air. "You thought poisoning the lake would solve your problem. But your problem wasn't the fish, or the dock, or me. It was your arrogance." Hale's lips trembled. "Jack, listen." "No. You listen." I raised my phone, the screen glowing with open emails and news alerts. "The county's sending inspectors. The news crews are already outside. You didn't just poison a lake, Martin. You poisoned your entire kingdom. And now it's collapsing." The room went quiet, deadly quiet. Hale's face drained of color. And then the shouting began again, louder, angrier, unstoppable. By the next morning, the county had cordoned off the lake. Hazmat suits, water testing kits, news cameras everywhere. The HOA board scattered like roaches under a floodlight. Some resigned. Some hid. And Hale? He was dragged out in handcuffs 2 days later, charged with reckless endangerment, environmental contamination, and half a dozen other crimes that sounded too clean for what he'd really done. The neighborhood was left reeling. Lawsuits flew, property values tanked, and for the first time in years, the HOA wasn't a shadow government pulling strings. It was rubble. As for me, I sat on my dock and watched the lake heal. It would take years, maybe decades, before the fish returned in full. But I could already see signs: dragonflies hovering, frogs croaking faintly in the reeds, the faint shimmer of minnows darting near the shore. One evening, Ellen came down with her kids. She stood beside me quietly as her boy tossed pebbles into the water. "You did this," she said softly. I shook my head. "No. The lake did. I just made sure people listened." She smiled faintly. "Still, thank you." I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The truth was, I hadn't done it for thanks. I'd done it for the lake. For my father's memory. For the part of me that refused to bow to men like Hale. A month later, the HOA officially dissolved. No more board, no more rules scrawled in fine print. Just neighbors, figuring things out for themselves. Some were angry at me for pushing so hard, for dragging everything into the light. Others saw me as the man who saved them. But I didn't care about either side. I cared about the water. Because the lake was more than a view, more than an aesthetic. It was a living thing. And it had nearly been killed by greed. Not again. On the first clear morning of fall, I walked down to the dock with my rod in hand. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with orange and gold. I sat, baited my hook, and cast my line into the water. The bobber floated there, silent, patient. Maybe nothing would bite. Maybe it would be years before they came back. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that the lake was mine again. And as the mist curled low over the water, I whispered into the stillness, words my father once told me long ago. Patience. The lake gives when it wants to. This time, I wasn't just waiting for fish. I was waiting for life. And I knew it would come.